I started to text Russ earlier today and ask him, who's teaching your class tonight? But as I look out, I realize I'm teaching his class tonight. What a great chapter of the Bible to join us with, too. You folks that have been back there in Ezekiel and Daniel, you have picked an excellent time to join us. Do you have a question? Yeah, we're going to start in chapter 1 tonight, folks. I've only spent 5 months doing this. Yeah, I ought to be able to streamline it pretty well. Hey, I'll give you real quick, chapters 1 through 16. Jesus wins. And now we'll jump into chapter 17. That's where we'll be, is chapter 17 tonight. Revelation chapter 17. Did the bell already ring? Okay. When I'm talking, I can't hear what other things are doing. So let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Father, we want to thank you for the many blessings that you've given to us. We are indeed grateful for this time of study tonight as we reflect upon the great truths revealed in your word. We recognize that you alone are almighty. We recognize that your throne is eternal and stands forever. We also recognize that those who stand with you can have that same hope of victory and ultimate triumph. We pray you'd be with us tonight and continue to be with us in our lives. Be with our shepherds as they watch over us. Continue to strengthen and uphold them and help us to do the same. And Father, we pray you would lead us to some poor lost soul in this world around us. We ask this all in Christ's holy name. Amen. I won't do a whole lot of introductory comments, but I do feel obligated to just make a few observations, especially for you that are coming into this with none of the groundwork that led up to it. As we study this book, we've made this observation with almost every class. What we're looking at is a vision given to the Apostle John, showing the Christians who are about to suffer great persecution under the hands of the Roman Empire, they will be vindicated by God. They will continue to suffer, but they're going to get through this. Now, it may end in their death, it may end in their demise, but throughout the book we've got these contrast of scenes given because this is apocalyptic imagery. It is dramatic, overly stated illustrations used throughout the book as it's depicting this constant war in so many ways. And so God's people will stand victorious with the Redeemer, the Lamb. This is about them. This is about the Christians in the first century facing persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. Chapter 17 is a rich scene of this vision. And as we've noticed, and we'll continue to highlight through this study tonight, there's this contrast going back and forth throughout the book. And on this particular occasion, in this particular chapter, we're looking at a contrast of two women and a contrast of two cities. And so we've seen a woman earlier in the book. In the vision in chapter 12, we have the woman here who brings forth the male child. And when the male child ascends to the heavens, which is Christ, this woman is then carried into the wilderness and provided for and protected by God. And so she is the faithful representative of all God's people, faithful to Him throughout the dispensations, before Christ and even after Christ. In chapter 17, what we have is the opposite woman. This is the woman not of nobility, not of prestige, not of faithfulness, not of devotion, but a woman of harlotry and whoredom. This woman of ill repute. The city, as we see these contrasted, is Babylon the Great, as it mentions later in this chapter. Its glorious opposite is the beloved city. We'll see it in chapter 20 and verse 9, and it will take the dominant scene towards the end of the vision. The identity of both of these women, though, chapter 12 and in chapter 17, has long been contested. Scholars can't seem to make up their minds what they believe. Some contend that Jerusalem is this woman. Now, again, for those that are just coming into this class, this is symbolism. So this doesn't necessarily reflect literal things. This chapter, we'll be able to see that pretty clearly. But this woman represents a city, Babylon the Great. And so some believe that's Jerusalem. And so they try to predate the book or date the book pre-AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem. And in their minds, sequentially, that would have to be that case. But I will suggest a few things as to why it isn't Jerusalem. So, just 4 or 5 observations very briefly. Her description throughout chapter 17 and in chapter 18 better suits the Roman Empire. I want you to notice a few of the key phrases, and I'm just going to kind of read this instead of referencing the verses because we'll see them as we go through this. She reigns over kings. She sits upon waters. She sits upon the beast. She's clothed in royal splendor. All identifying traits that really do not fit Jerusalem. Certainly fits Rome better. The geographical descriptions that we'll see slightly in chapter 17, we'll see it more dominantly in chapter 18 as sea traders mourn her demise. That's chapter 18, verses 17 through 19. That does not fit Jerusalem. That does not fit Jerusalem. The commercial enterprise, merchants and traders all over the world used this city, used this woman. We see that in chapter 18 as they mourn her demise. That again does not fit with Jerusalem. The moral decay and the moral decline and her influence over society, over the world at large. Jerusalem never had that scope of influence. Even when you take the dramatic, overly stated symbolism in Revelation, Jerusalem never had that scope of influence over the world. But Rome certainly did. In chapter 17, verse 5, I had the right number though, verse 5. She's called the mother of harlots. The mother of harlots. Jerusalem doesn't fit that description, folks, but Rome and the Roman Empire certainly does. In fairness, and I offer this only as maybe a slight defense of those who take the viewpoint that this is Jerusalem, the language sounds so similar to Matthew 24, to Luke 17, and Luke 21. But as we have observed throughout this quarter and a half, I guess, that's the style of apocalyptic judgment language. It always echoes itself. It always makes that same flavor. It always brings to mind the same imagery. Isaiah 13 in our introduction materials where we notice some of those things. As Isaiah 13 describes what truly sounds like the end of the world. The sun no longer shines, the stars quit shining. It's like the cosmos falls in on itself. Well, what he's talking about, you go back to Isaiah 13:1, this is the decree of God against Babylon. That was against the actual city of Babylon. And so that's just the style of judgment language. It will always foreshadow the next judgment. Now, something else, another theory as to who this woman is the Roman Catholic Church. They believe the harlot to be the Roman Catholic Church epitomized in the Pope himself and in the invention of the papacy. Or they take as a kind of a cousin of that maybe, is that it is apostate Christianity. It is apostate religion in itself as the apostate church has grown so corrupt and fallen so far from truth. I think to take any of those viewpoints I've just listed, which I went through them kind of quickly, would be to ignore the context, both the context of the book and the historical clues that are given therein. Her identity really does come on display when you keep those things in mind. One other observation before we go verse by verse. Satan almost always approaches destroying God's purposes and God's people in 3 ways. He uses political means, brute force some cases, as he is symbolized by the beast from the sea in chapter 13. The bee does not have the same effect, I don't think. The beast who comes up from the sea in chapter 13. That is the political entity of the Roman Empire. He uses false religion, paganism, and branches off of Christianity, incorporating false doctrine and things that are not true but false. He uses the beast from the land in later part of chapter 13. And he uses the worlds of lust and flesh and temporal things, temporal temptations. We see that over and over again through the New Testament. It's reflected very well throughout this book. The church of the first century, the audience of Revelation, fought with these 3 things. And they fought with them regularly. They waged war relentlessly against these 3 enemies. And let me say, we have got the same battle today, in a sense. Not the same things, but in a sense it is still the same. We must face the pressure and stay true to Christ, just as they did. As we have made it our custom in this class, we're going to read the first 6 verses of this section, and then we'll go back through and we'll pick it apart. Verse 1, this is Revelation 17, verse 1. And one of the 7 angels who had taken the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, and with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. I wish I could have had you look at me while I read that, especially you guys that are just coming into this class, because your eyes probably got bigger with every part of that description. What is going on here? Well, this is so typical of this book so far. John sees another one of the angels, verse 1, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. So we don't know specifically which angel this is. It matters not. This angel is of the same rank. He is of the same order and position as the others. And he calls to John and says, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Essentially, come and see. That's the plea of the book of Revelation. That's the over and over again statement from the angelic host, or at least the heavenly vantage point, is come and see. A Christian will always do better off to take a step back and see things from heaven's perspective. That's what Revelation offers its audience. You see all of this in a temporal way. You see the foe, that is the beast. You see the Roman Empire and all that it opposes Christianity with. But what God offers in the book of Revelation is take a step back, step into the heavenly realm, and now look at it. It is not the same foe. It is not the same fierce monstrosity. And so God gives him a glimpse of what's really going on. He says, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Now we're going to see this, especially in these first few verses. If you'll look down at verse 15 of chapter 7, as he explains some of these things in more detail. He says to me, the waters which you saw, that's the waters the harlot sits upon, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this city resides over many, has the power and influence over many. By the way, this is a description of ancient Babylon. In Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 13, the prophet Jeremiah says, O you who dwell on many waters, a reference to actual Babylon. And so in true poetic fashion, this typifies Rome. The language employed there in verse 1 is not new to the Bible. The great harlot who sits on many waters. Many times throughout biblical literature, we have cities, we have nations, we have peoples referred to as harlots, or at least compared to the practices of harlotry and the practices of fornication. Nineveh in Nahum 3 verse 4. chapter 23, the city of Tyre, the nation of Tyre, Isaiah 23 verse 17. Babylon itself in Isaiah 47 verses 5 through 7. Even on several occasions, Israel is accused of committing harlotry or whoredom in some cases. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 23 and many other places. The idea is they have defiled themselves with the sins of ungodliness. I want you to appreciate, in many ways, this chapter is one of the more poetic of the book, especially as it brings in some of the imagery. I'm glancing around to make sure there's no kids in here because the word harlotry and whoredom and many other ways that it's depicted through this chapter is a little grotesque. That's kind of the point. That's kind of the point. I wrote the word harlot on this outline more times than I care to share with you as I was writing these notes, because it comes up so many times in this chapter. The great harlot who sits on many waters, an enticing temptress to mankind, leading them away from God. As she seduced the world into her bed of ungodliness with her cruelty and her malice, she made them take part in all the pleasures immorality has to offer. Rome certainly did this better than any society who came before it, and I believe did it better than any society who has came since it. Rome excelled in this behavior. Verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So these ideas again connect to some of the terminology that comes up later in the chapter. Look down at verse 18. The woman who you saw, and this is why I've been saying city and women, it's contrast. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So here in this verse it says she reigns over them, but back up in verse 2 it says that she committed fornication with them. The idea is that they went to bed with her for all of these political and social and economic and even religious rewards. And she indulged them in these pursuits. She seduced all realms of known society. You kind of have a little bit of a differencing elevation of society in verse 2. The kings of the earth, then down a little bit later it says, and the inhabitants of the earth. The idea is, she was so seductive in what she offered mankind that she actually could get all peoples involved in this. From the kings at the very top to even the inhabitants of the earth, all realms of society. Earth dwellers were made drunk with her ungodliness. We'll see this kind of come up again in a moment. Verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Very similar terminology that we saw earlier in the vision as John was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. The idea is that the Spirit basically has taken John and given him a different vantage point, given him a heavenly viewpoint so he can see the picture for what it truly is. Verse 3 is really where some of the ideas that she is in fact Jerusalem, that's where a lot of this comes from. In chapter 12, we have the woman who brings forth the male child. After the child ascends to glory on the throne, then she is then carried into the wilderness. And so people, especially who believe this particular viewpoint, they believe, okay, so here she is. She essentially goes into the wilderness a virgin, and she is seduced by the beast and comes out of the wilderness a harlot. But I believe you're missing a whole lot of different points that are really being made in the passage. None of this text necessitates that viewpoint. The word wilderness, as it's used here and as it's used in chapter 12, is defined by its context. When you look at its usage in chapter 12, you've got God who is providing for this woman, protecting and making provision for her. So wilderness could be a place of God's provision and protection. Wilderness could also be a place of desolation. It could be a place of emptiness, a place of ruin. And certainly, as the context demands, we can see which this one is, especially compared to the one in chapter 12. Notice her description in verse 3. She sits on this scarlet beast. She is full of names of blasphemy and has 7 heads and 10 horns. It can leave little doubt who she really is. She is the beast of chapter 13 and verses 1 and following. Now there's 2 beasts in chapter 13. There's the sea beast, which is this woman, and then there is the land beast, which is not introduced right now. At least it's the beast she's riding. But you've got these different metaphors that he's blending in the vision. Apocalyptic language does not have to blend the same way we look at things. We try to literalize so much. This doesn't have to literalize anything, and we don't necessarily have to have it all make sense. One thing we did earlier in this class, is I had you close your eyes and I read the section. That's one of the best ways to see this, even though your eyes are closed. It was kind of a see in your mind kind of deal. But it's so you can imagine it. Well, that's really what's going on here. We're painting big pictures. A few things that make it obvious this is the beast from the sea of chapter 13. The beast comes up out of the pit in chapter 13, verse 1. And here in chapter 17, verse 8, the beast you saw and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. Same place. This woman and the beast both have 7 heads and 10 horns. We see that in chapter 13, verse 1. We see it here in chapter 17, verse 3. And again in chapter 17 and verse 9, 7 heads. We also see that this woman makes war with God's side. In chapter 13, it's war with the saints. Here in chapter 17, it's war with the Lamb, down in verse 14. The woman in chapter 17 is not, or excuse me, where am I at here? Verse 8, there we go. You saw was and is not and will ascend. Okay? But back in chapter 13, the beast was wounded with the strike that should have killed him, but was not. Same stuff. Same stuff. We're talking about the same person being represented here as this woman unfolds here in chapter 17. The beast and the woman are the Roman Empire. They are the Roman Empire. This woman is clothed in scarlet. Verse 4. As she rides the beast of scarlet, she is clothed in scarlet in verse 4. Scarlet reflects luxury. It reflects temporal things, and it reflects having splendor. In many ways, even in the ancient culture, it reflects royalty. All those things are depicted by this woman. She represents all of them. And by the way, she's clothed this way, so is the beast on which she rides. Now, Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, compares scarlet to sin. Though your sins be as scarlet. We sing a song that uses that exact phrase, by the way. And so we need to make sure we see that. In that world, it represented royalty and splendor and wealth and luxuries. But in biblical language, it kind of depicts some of that too, but it also depicts sin, for which this woman certainly is known for. Verse 4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. So again, bringing wealth and royalty to mind, the images that are employed here. She looks appealing. She looks attractive. She looks like something to appeal all men, all creation. All of these things also reflect power and influence, which is how the beast is described in chapter 13. All these are wrapped up in this seductive temptress. As she lays on her couch of plush, lustful cushions and drinks from the chalice of absolute abominations, she lures all those who pass by to join her in her bed of defilement. That's the picture. She is a vile, awful thing. One thing that's really fascinating about this, she drinks this golden cup. You have this image in your mind? Be careful not to imagine it too much, because she's a seductive temptress, okay? She's a harlot. But she's got this, that was a joke, but she's got this golden chalice. What it's filled with is not something to quench the thirst, folks. It's not something to satisfy that need you have. No. It's full of something that leaves you drier, leaves you emptier than before. It is full of abominations, and the vision will elaborate more on that in just a moment. I want us to appreciate, I know that sometimes it's hard to really draw flat-out applications from this book because it was written to a different generation and it is so symbolic of what they are going through. But I do think there is this application. There has always been temporal things of this world that have enticed us and caused us to be distracted, much like a scarlet harlot. I did not intend to rhyme that, but that was really cool. I'll never be able to do that again, probably. But we need to be careful, folks, that temporality and that materialism and wealth And these things don't distract us from what really is important. I know I'm saying that to the group that more than likely gets it. You're here on a Wednesday night. You get it. But we can't lose sight of that. And by the way, that is a great plea throughout this book. Don't let those things cloud your judgment. She is a vile temptress, and she will lead you to hell herself. Verse 5. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Her title is as clear and as plain as if it is written across her forehead. And this entire phrase is her title, is her name. Mystery is part of it. That's not a statement before her name. No, that's part of her name. Mystery in our culture really doesn't reflect the same thing as it does in Bible times. Typically, mystery reflects something that was unknown at one point in time but is now known. Something concealed at one point but now is revealed. This temptress at one point was able to hide her true identity. She concealed it. But because of the vision, but because of what God is revealing to John, she can hide it no longer. It is as plain as if written on her forehead. Babylon the Great. No doubt, I'm telling you right now, we can have no doubt that to John's audience, the original recipients of this book, this was the Roman Empire. No beast was as formidable as the Roman Empire, and that's what Daniel's visions, which you guys have been studying, I think. I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but that's what Daniel's vision depicts. The Roman Empire, the greatest of the four beasts of his visions. See the descriptor. Now, as this title continues to unfold, it's a long title, but it's all part of it. The mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. That does not mean that ungodliness and sin originated with this woman or originated with the Roman Empire, but in her day it was as if she kept making more of it. Like she's procreating and all of her offspring is just as bad as she is. She's making more of this vileness as she produces children of earth, children of abomination, children of deeper corruption. Verse 6. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. Now I want you again to appreciate the picture. I don't know if I've used that word in this class yet. I've used it a bunch throughout the quarter, but we're looking at a picture. As the artist is revealing the vision to John, the picture has been painted in more full. And as the vision unfolds, we see a greater image on the page. Here is a prostitute, scantily clad, astride a great beast, fully inebriated, drunk with the blood of the saints. The cup of filth is overflowing. This is the woman. This is the woman that has enticed the world. She can hide who she really is from a lot of people, but to the Christian, she can't hide it. That's part of the vision. The vision is revealing who she really is to John so that the Christians can know who they're really dealing with. They see her for who she is. She can hide no longer. Much like the drunkard with the smell of liquor on his breath can't get enough of the booze, so this beast, so this monstrosity, this harlot cannot get enough of the blood of the saints. And so she continues to wreak havoc on them. One observation that Homer Haley made on this section, and I liked it. Typically when I come across something that's said very well, I like to share it with you. In the harlot's intoxicating drink is the blood of martyrs who had offered their lives for Christ on the sacrificial altar, whether in the arena, under the sword, or on the fiery pile. They had been slain for the entertainment of the depraved and to sate the bloodthirstiness of their enemies. It had been lust for power, honor, prestige, wealth, and pleasure, together with hate, ill will, self-will, and malice, all seated in the flesh that had led to the slaughter of God's people. All these qualities are symbolized in the harlot. Every time she sticks another Christian with a sword, she's standing there with her cup to fill up with his blood. That's the image. A vile, disgusting, repulsive behavior before us. But I also want you to appreciate as the overall point is those who have suffered, all those who have been martyred under this horrible persecution. It's not just the blood of the martyrs that she's been drinking, folks. It's the blood of those who have compromised. It's the blood of those who have given in, who did not stand true to the faith, but instead went to bed with her. And because of their unfaithfulness to God, she killed them. This is the woman we're seeing here. Very end of verse 6. When John saw her, he says, I marveled with great amazement. I tell you, this verse and the next verse is really fascinating. I don't know why John does this, and I don't know why the vision tells us, because everything about this woman, well, let me say it like this instead. I don't know what John expected to see, but whatever he expected to see, this woman wasn't it. She surprised him. Now, I think, let me give you this. See if this would surprise you. So you're seeing a vision, right? By the way, if you're new to this class, which half of you are, we've not seen this illustration used yet. We've seen figures of it. We've not seen a prostitute used yet like this. Now, we have seen the allusion to prostitution earlier in chapter 2 and 3. Not here yet. So what John sees is a drunken harlot riding a monster in a wilderness of desolation, drunk, with a cup of blood. Now, would that surprise you a little bit? And so it seems to have surprised John a little bit, because it does seem to deviate from what we've been looking at. We've seen the woman, we've seen the beast, but some of this is still very, very new to the imagery. Anybody have any questions or comments on that section? All right. Verse 7. The meaning of the woman and the beast. We're not going to read this last section in one sitting. It would take a little bit too much time, and it's really all part of one story arch. So verse 7. And the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Whatever John's reaction, whether it was verbal or visual, it gets the angel's attention. And again, I don't know why this is in there. I don't know why the previous verse is in there, although I can kind of see why John is in amazement. I don't know why the angel asked him, why did you marvel? Because the angel is there to explain this vision. The angel is there to give John the information that feeds into why all this is the way it is. It's there, and the vision is intended to invoke some kind of a reaction, even from John. It's kind of an unusual thing to include in there. The angel then tells him, I'm going to tell you what all this means. The mystery. I'm going to reveal this to you. The woman and the beast, in verse 7, he says, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast. Those things are interwoven. They are indivisible. I say that right? Indivisible? The only time I say that is in the Pledge of Allegiance. And since I graduated high school, I don't say the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. Never anywhere to say it, just to defend my patriotism here briefly. But indivisible. They are inseparable, these two people, this beast and this woman who rides him. Lust rides upon, controls, and governs all ravenous, persecuting, self-seeking political beasts. And that is why these two are so interwoven with one another. I don't know if I've explained this very well tonight. In chapter 13, the two beasts. The first one is the Roman Empire. The second one is imperial cultism. It is the deifying of the Roman Caesars. Everything the second beast does in chapter 13, it supports the first beast of chapter 13. And I hope I've explained that, but all I can say is just good luck to you guys that are jumping in the middle of this class. Verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. I like to point this out once in a while. These next 3, 4, 5 verses are among the most complicated of the entire book. And pretty much nobody agrees on what they mean. I'll give you my take for whatever it is worth. But as we go through this, please remember the apocalyptic imagery that is employed. Things do not necessarily have to be separate in apocalyptic language. And so the beast and the harlot in some ways are separated here. But really in purpose, in function, in mission, in roles, they're the same. And so I think we would do well to kind of remember that as we go through this next few verses here. Without the background of the two beasts in chapter 13, some of this is going to be a little tough. But I want you to appreciate that if you're new to this class, you read chapter 13, you'll see some of this. These parallel one another very well. Lots of similarities, lots of connections. I believe that's why this verse begins the way it does. The beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. I don't know whether he's referring to the beast in which the harlot rides, or if he's now mixing metaphors potentially and saying the harlot and the beast, they're pretty much the same, or if he's kind of calling back to chapter 13, essentially saying, John, remember the beast you saw in chapter 13. Here's the details though, and let's not get bogged down by them. I have not made this plea either for this class, but I will now. The details aren't really the point. The point's the overall image. The point is the overall picture being painted. But this one is the beast who will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. Now, was and is not and will. This is a callback to what was said in chapter 13. The idea is, here is this beast who is practically indestructible. Remember, one of the heads was struck with a wound that should have killed it in chapter 13, and yet it did not die. And so all the world marveled at this beast because it was struck and it would not be killed. The idea is repeated here. This beast was, is not, see that? That's like the death blow, and will. And then that idea is really repeated at the end of verse 8. Was and is not and yet is. Same stuff. This thing should have been killed by what struck it, and yet it wasn't hurt. It wasn't knocked down too bad. It got back up and kept it going. Well, that's the idea here. And so this makes the winning of Christ and the victory of Christ later in the book that much more powerful, as this is a beast that no one could kill. Many take the idea, as we observed in chapter 13, that this is a reference to the emperors of Rome. Nero killed himself in, I forgot to write it down, I believe it's 68, 69, 70, somewhere in there, in that ballpark. Nero killed himself. And in that type of culture, and certainly this is the view some commentators have, is that Nero was reincarnated or kind of resurrected and then embodied by Domitian. And so that's what the viewpoint some of them take. Domitian more or less ascended in his place. This beast could not be stopped. But again, it's not about emperors. Now, I think that's missing the point. That's getting a little too literal and a little too detailed. The point is, here's a monster that could not be defeated. And yet Christ, when he rides onto the scene later in the book, he's going to smoke him. Pardon the pun, because of the beast that ascended out of the smoke of the bottomless pit. So that was really a reference. That was a joke just for the Revelation class. Divided you guys up tonight. Now I want you to appreciate, as the beast comes out of the bottomless pit, I want you to notice, as this image is reinforced, and chapter 9 really brings this out. The bottomless pit is where the locusts ascend out, the smoke comes out and clouds out the sun, pollutes the air, makes the world practically unlivable. And that's the idea here. It's where Satan rules in chapter 9 and verse 11. It's where the beast who made war with the two witnesses in chapter 11 comes from. All these things come from the bottomless pit. Awfulness, disgustingness, horribleness, probably a lot of other nesses in there somewhere. But that's what we're looking at. And so here's where this beast comes out of in verse 8. But I want you to see this. As we have observed throughout the class, it introduces some horrible foe in which the Christian faces. Some awful thing in which the kingdom of God is put against. And every time it does, it presents it in a way that is almost, well, it's horrible to imagine. And then it follows it with, don't worry. Its end is set. That's what perdition is. You guys that are using the New American Standard, it reflects that. He comes up out of the bottomless pit and he goes to perdition. Destruction is the idea. Utter ruin, destruction. Not total annihilation, but absolute ruin. Verse 9. Verse 9. Oh, excuse me, I skipped several verses here. So as this is depicted, you'll see this come up again in verse 11, the word perdition, as this is where the beast is actually going to go, down in verse 11. So again, the earth people, in the way they see this beast, they marvel at this creature. That's the same terminology used in chapter 13. This is right there halfway through verse 8. Those who dwell on the earth will marvel. This thing should have been killed by what hit it, and yet it doesn't die. And so what do the worldlians do? I don't think that's a word, but it's a good one. Worldlians, what they do is they marvel at it. They think it's the coolest thing in the world. It's the reason they serve it. It's the reason they bow their knees to the Roman deities, the Roman imperial deities, the Caesars. But this death blow that mesmerizes the unbelievers, the Christians should see it for what it is. Those who do have their name written in the book of life. Those who choose to not see the beast. Is that the second bell? I'm finishing this real quick. Those who don't bow to Caesar, they see this for what it is. They know the outcome. Everybody else thinks the beast is going to rule forever, but the Christian knows it will end in doom. That's what perdition is. I think we would do well to reflect upon that great truth. I appreciate your attention. Are you guys going to be in here Sunday too? No. Do you have a question, a comment? Or are you waving? Not wait. Well, you know what? I'll wave at you anyways, Ed. What you got?
So, blood of Christians, blood of martyrs.
Blood of Christians, blood of what? Martyrs, yes.
What's the difference?
There's not a difference. The martyrs, sometimes it's just to elaborate on the poetic nature of the book. By the way, there's a lot of different things. Well, like the harlot and the beast, they're the same thing. So why does he switch the terminology here and start calling her a harlot instead of a beast? It's to further elaborate a different element of her probably seductress ways across the world. That help? Well, I appreciate your attention tonight. Good luck on figuring out the rest of the book then, between now and Sunday.